Μέρχε κυρίες και κύριοι, καλησπέρα σας και καλωσορίσατε στην αρχαία μας αγορά. Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the cradle of democracy. As you know, the Athens Democracy Forum has evolved over the years, and as it was founded at the New York Times, we have the honor to have the President International of the New York Times, Stephen Dunbar Johnson, to extend his welcome remarks. So, Stephen, I hand over to you.
Mayor Bakianis, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, a very warm welcome to this magnificent setting. As Achilles has mentioned, I've no doubt on several occasions, this is the 11th time the Athens Democracy Forum is gathering in the ancient agora here to gauge what is happening to the democratic ideal born among these ancient stones. I would like to thank Achilles and his team for the hard work they have put into this event, which was born in part as a celebration of the New York Times partnership with Katamarini, a partnership that celebrates its 25th anniversary this year. And I'm delighted that Alexis Papahelas, who is with us today as well, this evening as well. But since then, the forum has grown from strength to strength, and the decision to move it under the auspices of the Democracy and Culture Foundation, still with a close association with the New York Times, I believe has allowed it to flourish. Indeed, I look back at the inaugural event that we convened in this very place over a decade ago, and I recall it was a 2-hour discussion, and it now extends to 5 days. That is testament, as I've said, to Achilles and his team's vision and hard work, and to the support of the headline sponsors, Microsoft, the Climate Democracy Initiative, Arizona State University, Taiji University, and Google, and to the forum's gold and silver sponsors, EBRD, Libra Philanthropies, the Bergen Institute, and so many others you see, I hope you see on the screens. The support of the sponsors allows the forum to extend far beyond this room into the special report in today's International New York Times, distributed in some over 160 countries worldwide. And your contributions, all your thinking and thoughts over the last 4 days and tomorrow, will be summarized in the New York Times special edition, which I believe is going to be published on the week of October 17th. Alas, the forum's growth, though, and its enduring raison d'etre is not a reflection of the health of liberal democracies. And I'm certainly not here to proclaim the good news that in over a decade of convening these intellectually enriching and thought-provoking events, that we have reversed the global backsliding of democracy. By all the major indexes, the world's authoritarian and would-be authoritarian rulers have tightened their grip. According to the V-Dem Institute's latest democracy report, the advances in global levels of democracy made over the last 35 years have been wiped out, and we are back to 1986 levels. I think, as we heard this morning, 72% of the world's population, that is 5.7 billion people, live under autocratic rule. So our theme at the forum this year is, do we dare to hope? And as we look out at the world in which authoritarian rulers no longer feel shame at trampling on elemental liberties and actually dismiss fundamental building blocks of democracy, elections, pluralism, political participation, transparency, civil liberties, a free and independent media, as Western impositions, it is not easy to find too many silver linings. Russia has set new standards for trampling on the ideals of sovereignty and democracy. illegally invading a neighbor to block it from moving towards democratic rule, and crushing it at home. The world is also watching carefully as many democracies in the West, including the United States, wrestle with an anti-democratic backlash, fed by social alienation, growing wealth inequality, the internet, and all the other forces feeding far-right forces in wealthy nations. Freedom of the press is under attack everywhere, including in established liberal democracies. It is a sad fact that in many parts of the world, it has never been more dangerous to be a journalist, particularly for female journalists. This matters. I put it to you that democracy and freedom cannot truly exist without a free and independent media to seek the truth and hold power to account. So where is there hope? Part of it is that the rise of authoritarians is not evidence of a more efficient or effective means of government. The same forces that keep Putin in power, cronyism, corruption, fear, have plagued his military forces while his economy sinks deeper into crisis. The hope is in that those who believe in democracy are learning from its setbacks, that it is the purpose of the purpose of this annual gathering, to discover and discuss what can be done, to narrow the divisions, heal the planet, have a more equitable distribution of wealth, and in other ways to give all people a real stake in their governance and fortunes. We do dare to hope. And as a media executive, I take hope in the fact that the relationship we started here in Greece with Katerini a quarter of a century ago still endures. I take hope from the fact that this forum was born under the shadow of the deep financial crisis here in Greece and the terrible hardship that invoked for so many of its citizens. Yet, here we are a decade later, as my colleague Liz Alderman reported in our pages earlier this week. The Greek economy is now growing at twice the Eurozone average, and that some credit rating agencies are now raising Greece's debt rating to investment grade. This country, the cradle of democracy, endures. We dare to hope. Before I close, I would like to especially thank Mayor Bakianis and the city of Athens, who have been staunch and faithful stakeholders of this endeavor, and has had the United Nations Democracy Fund, who've been with us from the beginning, enabled by the late Kofi Annan, whose foundation is with us, and who are inaugurating today the annual Kofi Annan Next Gen Democracy Prize. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and it's now my honor to invite Mayor Bakianis to the stage. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Athens. It is indeed a great privilege and a pleasure to welcome you to the birthplace of democracy. Now, of course, talking about democracy, as we heard earlier, we all know that we are going through probably the worst crisis since the 1930s. The number of countries that can be described as democracies is quite literally shrinking. Unfortunately, more than a third of the world's population is subject to authoritarian rule, while only 6.4%, let me repeat this, because it is a terrible statistic, 6.4% is enjoying full democracy. Now, of course, you're probably thinking that democracy is quite a broad concept that has been heavily overused, often misused, and in some cases misunderstood. So please bear with me as I put forward the definition. I am, like I think most of you, referring to liberal democracy, the one that was quite literally born here, just a few meters from where we stand, organically, out of the interaction of Athenian citizens, the one that developed throughout centuries in cities like Rome, Paris, London, and Boston. The political system, the most expansive and successful experiment in the history of mankind, which delegates the few to carry out the majority's will, by the people, of the people, and for the people. At its core, the rights and freedoms that ensure respect for the dignity of each individual. Now, of course, it's clearly a good thing, and I would say a necessary thing, that we have chosen to perceive individual dignity primarily through the prism of political freedom. However, we should also be sufficiently attentive to the dignity of corruption, inequality, and the lack of economic opportunity. As we continue to defend rights and freedoms, we should also do more to deal with the pain and dangers of economic hardship and inequality. We should do more to respond to the need for climate justice. In other words, for a political system founded on the promise of a better tomorrow, the identity crisis is quite clear. There is a severe, but I'd say not fatal, functional flaw: the inability to deliver fair and equitable economic outcomes. This has corroded trust in public institutions, estranged the significant numbers of citizens from the government, and given rise to internal forces of division, ethno-nationalism, and repression. Now, I think that all of us agree that populism is not the answer, but it does, at times, pose the right questions. The European Union's message of no one left behind captures a major underlying need. Liberal democracies must do better at addressing the economic grievances that populists have so effectively exploited. To prevent exclusion, both our rhetoric and our policies must work in tandem. A great Greek, a great modern Greek for a change, once said that the biggest enemies of democracy are elitism and populism. The former entails policies without ethical rhetoric, or even without ethics. It suffices to technocratic hegemony, lacking legitimization and therefore effectiveness. The latter is limited to declaratory speech without effective responses to crises and problems, thus increasing polarization and the gap between elites and citizens. So, in order for all of us to make democracy convincing once again, policies and ethical rhetoric must not be separated. Or, to use a rather trendy phrase of my 16-year-old son, we have to walk it like we talk it, and vice versa. Given this environment, it is a truly fascinating time for a politician to serve at the local government. This is, after all, the closest democratic institution to the citizen. And we have a unique opportunity to work bottom-up. We have the unique opportunity to tackle global issues by drawing from the local perspective and the urban experience, which will actually allow us to better align people's needs and expectations, to bridge the distance between political institutions and the citizen. This is, ladies and gentlemen, how we build resilient democracies. Door to door, block by block, united by our shared conviction that we can and we will do better together. This is also why this event is so important for our city. This is why this event is so important for all of us. And I would like, in closing, to take this opportunity to thank my friend Achilleas Tsialtas and his amazing team, thank the New York Times, and of course our very own Kathimerini for making it possible. Welcome to Athens. Enjoy your stay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your eloquent words, your support, but also your vision and sharing our vision and our work over the years. So we've now come to the Aristotle address. And for this year, we have John Kerry, the presidential envoy on climate, to say a few words. Despite all good intentions, he could not make it here in person at the last minute, but he felt very strongly about what we do, and he's asked us to have his words on video, which will be followed by a reaction from Bill Ritter, the former governor of Colorado, who, in conversation with Pamela Paul, our columnist at the New York Times. And then Roger Cohen will take us through this year's global conversation on polarization. So let's hear it from John Kerry.
Hello, and thank you, everyone at the Athens Democracy Forum, and thank you, Achilles, for the introduction. I really wish I could be with you all in person today, and you have no idea how hard I tried to arrange the schedule. But I am in UAE, where we are preparing for the COP in December. But today, we're here to address two of the most pressing issues of the 21st century, the battle to defend democracy and the battle against the climate crisis. I think everyone understands instantaneously the value of this discussion taking place in Athens. After all, what great debates and cutting-edge thinking has set the stage for all of us now. And on that stage, we are now seeing demagogues and charlatans pushing back once again against centuries of the elevation of the human spirit through democracy. We also face another test. Greece has been decimated by floods and historic wildfires this summer. And in the north during the summer, one blaze was so powerful, it grew 4 times the size of New York City and was the largest wildfire ever on record within EU borders. It is clear, my friends, across the world, these disasters and the climate crisis aren't just increasingly threatening our environment. They are a test of the very way that we govern, and in some cases, don't. President Biden has said repeatedly, democracy stands at a crossroads, and as global scientists are telling us with increasing alarm, the planet stands at a crossroads too. The choices that we make in the next few years must prove how, in the face of growing threats, democracies can deliver for their people better than repression can or will. The stakes have literally never been higher. The climate crisis is what our military leaders call a threat multiplier. And those threats are starting now to cause disruption to the basic safety and foundation of our communities and governments. This crisis threatens our health in ways that many people haven't begun to even comprehend. Air pollution alone kills over 7 million people every year, 1 person every 5 seconds, while the availability of water in many places continues to be diminished, affecting every aspect of life. The crisis also threatens economies around the world. A recent National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration report found that since 2000, billion-dollar climate disasters occur somewhere on the planet about once every 18 days. So, my friends, ask yourselves, how much sense does it make to be spending billions of dollars just to clean up the mess rather than investing some money to be able to make this transition faster? These disasters that we're experiencing threaten our safety, and increasing fragility worldwide demands much more on social services, which are then straining in the ability of governments to be able to provide for their citizens. On top of all this, as the climate crisis escalates, we're seeing bad actors use this opportunity as a moment to chip away at the democratic tenets that we've spent generations fighting for and building around. Think about, for example, freedom of speech. Environmental defenders and indigenous communities are now being targeted for their activism in defense of their homes. Brave leaders fighting against illegal deforestation deserve to have their voices emboldened, not silenced. And in some cases, we know of people who have been killed for taking their positions. Take the freedom of the press also. The spread of climate misinformation and disinformation is proliferating. And in some cases, even meteorologists are being attacked for discussing basic scientific facts and data on the news. This science needs to be on the front page, my friends, not censored. And take the freedom of assembly and right to petition. Authoritarians around the world are cracking down on even small-scale climate protests. We need to be listening to the increasing numbers of citizens in the streets, not detaining them. When democracy works as it ought to, when those in power listen to the growing calls of people, our institutions can help diffuse even the greatest dangers. Today, we need people worldwide to summon the collective will to overcome this crisis and for governments to respond to it. In 1970, 20 million people across the United States participated in the first ever Earth Day. I was proud to be among them. That call to action from engaged citizens led to remarkable landmark legislation, and it really led to the beginning of a global environmental movement that has not waned. But then, as now, people in the streets can't do the job alone. Governments the world over have to respond to the needs, the felt needs of people and the expressed needs of people. One of my predecessors, Madeleine Albright, is well known for saying, institutions of democracy must deliver. People want to vote and eat. I would add that they want to vote and breathe clean air. They want clean and more affordable choices, from how they drive their cars to how they heat their homes, how they light their factories, how they manufacture their goods. The truth is, democracies can deliver that. And in the United States, we're witnessing this in real time through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in clean energy and climate action ever. Historic legislation. And while you gather in Greece to talk about democracy and climate, elsewhere on the continent, leaders are attempting to use fossil fuels as a weapon of war. Let me be clear. Denying the climate crisis is denying reality, it's denying mathematics and physics, it's denying basic science. To do so is a failure to engage in basic responsibility based on truth. And truth is a fundamental virtue of democracy. Totalitarians, we know, make up their own truth, not the truth. Democracies fight to uphold the truth. Our awareness of the climate crisis and our ability to respond to it haven't come from totalitarianism. It came from the democracies. It was Jim Hansen's testimony, open testimony in the United States Senate in 1988 that began this conversation for real. And by their nature, democracies must be responsive to a wide range of views. This may make progress slow at times. It obviously does. At times, it can be painstakingly slow. But it also means that governments have to listen to the needs of the most vulnerable in our communities. That's why when we revitalize democracy and make sure it is in fact working the way it's intended, not beholden to special interests or a narrow few, then we are also strengthening our ability to overcome crisis. By protecting basic democratic rights worldwide, we are allowing everyone to have an equal voice in how the future should take shape. Democracy, like our climate, has been taken for granted, and there's so much work ahead of us now on all fronts. But this is also a major opportunity. By renewing our commitment to one, we're renewing our commitment to the other. In the face of the rising challenges to institutions and planet, I am betting on democracy. I'm betting on innovation and entrepreneurial activity and creativity of the human spirit and the human ability to galvanize action in a direction. We need to find solutions, and I'm convinced that our ingenuity will. I'm betting on our citizens around the world who care about this issue to make their voices heard. My friends, this is a fight like no other, but history has taught us that democracies have liberated more people, protected more people, educated more people, provided more opportunity to more people, and respected the rights of more people than any other form of government. I'm betting that our democratic institutions are going to keep delivering right now against the defining crisis of our time. So I'm now privileged to turn things over to someone who understands every single one of these crises better than almost anyone, my friend, Governor Bill Ritter. Thank you.
Governor Ritter, is this working?
I think so.
All right. So those were some bracing words from Secretary of State John Kerry. How do we deal with the climate crisis at an accelerating time of accelerating impact at the same time that democracy is both beleaguered internationally and in the States, and also I think it's fair to say dysfunctional in the United States?
I think we work every day to build better democratic institutions. I'm here with a group called Climate and Democracy Institute. We joined the Athens Democracy Forum for this week, really with a hope and probably a prayer that we will be able to reinforce the institutions that have supported the United States really as a beacon for democracy for so many years and really for so many decades. And while it is stressed, and while we see evidence of backlash, even in our own United States, we have a belief that we can't do otherwise, that we have to be working at building democratic institutions in a positive and constructive way in order for us to really tackle climate.
So I think it became clear at this afternoon's discussion about democracy at a hotter time that democracy is the best way to address climate change, but also that it's not enough, and that it's such a big problem that it requires a great deal of cooperation, both within a country and then also internationally. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the specific challenges that we have at home in the US to enacting climate change.
Sure. So it's interesting. We have challenges at the federal level. We have a Congress that is about to shut down the government. That doesn't bode well for us as a sort of functioning democratic institution or democratic state. But we also have states in the United States that have shown a great deal of positive development. And I just very quickly will make this case. We do see backsliding. We see backsliding among states in the United States on climate and on democracy. We saw 19 states pass voter restriction laws after January 6th of 2021, the insurrection at the Capitol. We saw 19 states. Interestingly, those same 19 states are sort of hostile toward climate policy. But we have 23 states that have done a great deal to pass climate-friendly legislation with limits, with clean energy goals, with different kinds of tax credits to add on to what's at the federal level. And in those states, they cover about 70% of all the population in the United States. So there's a battle for it inside our own country, but there's some positive news to emerge from it that has to do with a federal government where states can be very active. In a state like California that's 40 million people, and the fourth biggest economy in the world, according to California, that they actually can move in a way that other states will follow and demonstrate leadership that's global.
I'd like to talk about one specific example, not to get too into the nitty-gritty, but I think that it shows some of the challenges of addressing climate change when you're dealing with a federal system like our own, when you have interests in both the private sector and the public sector. So you're from Colorado, where you're looking at ways of new energy, new sources of wind power, of solar power. When you have states where, for example, you have sources of solar power that is intermittent and wind power, how do you then get states to cooperate and then bring power to states that have more resources to those that have less resources, while also dealing with infrastructure challenges to the grid, for example?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and the grid is absolutely part of the conversation when you're talking about the power sector. But we shouldn't be undone by that question, right? Because in Colorado, our major utility is going to reduce its emissions by 85% by 2030. They're bold, they're out there, we have a lot of renewable power, and so the important thing is to ensure that that gets done while we work on that last 15%. Some places it might be 10%, but not to be undone by the fact that we don't know yet. We really don't know yet, and I facilitated a conversation with a group of utilities from around the country and some environmental NGOs and environmental justice leaders, and we never answered the how to get to zero question. There are some cost barriers presently to the technologies available. There's political barriers, to be sure, but we believe that building democratic institutions is absolutely tied to this question of how to bring people along. The other thing that's been mentioned throughout this conference, and that was mentioned by both of our speakers tonight, is equity. And the socioeconomic reality needs to mirror what democracy promises. And I think, the Biden administration has absolutely made a commitment to that. We need to all do the same in terms of commitments to people that felt left behind by democracy at this stage.
We know that some of our most vulnerable populations in the United States, the people who have fewer resources economically, are also those who are most threatened by climate change. And there's a parallel, obviously, on the global stage, which we talked about earlier today, which is that the poorer nations often feel that they are suffering at the, where nations that were able to go through industrialization and modernize earlier, rely on fossil fuels, they now have to bear the brunt of those costs. How do you address those inequalities both at home and abroad?
Yeah, there's such an important parallel, and that's why, as an American, I feel pretty good about this conversation going forward, because I believe we get the justice issue here. We would never make someone, we really abhor the idea of someone paying for a crime they did not commit. That's actually kind of what happens if you have a very large carbon footprint and somebody else is bearing the brunt of your bad conduct or your conduct over time. That's a justice issue for us, and why we should pay attention to all of the nations with small carbon footprints that are feeling it first and worst. And I do think Americans, if given that narrative and explained that, would get that as an environmental or a climate justice issue.
I'm glad you brought it to the individual lesson, because I want to talk about another challenge there. Earlier today, there was mention of the fact that Rishi Sunak in the UK has pulled back on some of the regulations to help address climate change. And the justification, one of the justifications he used, was using the language of democracy. And he said that he believed that he needed to allow people to make a choice. Do we have the luxury of that? How do we combat that kind of message? Because it sounds good, but we know that greater action is required of everyone.
Yeah, he did that during Climate Week. It was such a mistake in my mind, because I feel like what happened there was the conservatives had a special election. They campaigned against some of the goals that are in the climate plan. They won the special election, and for a short-term electoral gain, he extended the long-term commitments. And I just think that's like the worst thing you could do right now. You have to demonstrate political courage. You have to demonstrate this willingness to avoid short-termism, as a friend of mine has coined at this conference, and really be about long-term. And to say that it was to give people a choice is to really, in a sense, abdicate his own need to demonstrate leadership in a democratic society, in a democratically elected society, that you are willing to pay the price to do the right thing around climate.
So short-term thinking obviously is a major barrier to what is a very long-term problem. In the United States, of course, that's exacerbated by an electoral system and financial systems that go along with that in terms of fundraising by our 2 4-year, 6-year election cycle. So how do you overcome those short-term thinking and those practical barriers to enacting long-term policy change?
I think inside of our electoral system, campaign financing is a big evil. I believe that the way we redistrict oftentimes can be organized in a way that takes people of color out of the mix, or they have lost the proportionate voice that they deserve to have, those kinds of things. So we have to, again, look at this as how to build democratic institutions. In some respects, we have to figure out how to circumvent the money, and that only happens with citizen participation. The only way you're going to make a dent in trying to circumvent the impact of money inside of politics. But I think it's the right question, Pamela, and I don't think I have a perfect answer to this. That's partly why we see, I think, kind of the dangerous place we're in the United States, is because we have things that have threatened over time our democratic institutions and make it difficult for us to attack climate change. But I really do believe the discussion here about citizen participation is something we should pay attention to as an antidote to the vast amount of money that really can pervert political outcomes.
So we know that having citizen action and participation in addressing this crisis is crucial. How do you get that at a time when there is a pervasive and often growing distrust, not only of institutions, but of science, where science has become politicized and polarized?
And I would add, especially at a time where there's media that reinforces the anti-science message, the anti-democracy message.
Not the New York Times.
What's that?
Not the New York Times.
Not the New York Times at all.
Yeah.
But there are media outlets that are fairly popular in some
Yes.
parts of America that sort of reinforce it. So that makes the job even more difficult. But again, I've heard it, in this conference, it's about leaders listening, leaders giving citizens the ability to participate, leaders, empowering citizens. So if you just think about environmental justice, several states in the United States have now stood up offices of environmental justice, or also just transition. And what those are about are going into communities that feel very left behind and saying to those communities, you're going to have a voice in how we build an energy economy in America that responds to climate. I can't tell you that's going to be easy. It's going to be a bumpy ride. There is a trust issue, absolutely. But if we are to do it, we will do it only because we are willing to listen to people in communities that have felt very left behind.
Well, we've talked about a lot of big, intractable, and complicated problems, and it's kind of hard to end on a positive note, but I would like to do that. So can you give an example of how you think democracy in the United States has effectively addressed climate change, either under the Biden administration or specifically in the work that you've been doing in Colorado?
Yeah, we are very heartened. In part, our work is bipartisan. We work with Republican and Democratic governors. There were 5 Republican governors before the 2018 cycle that had passed clean energy legislation, in part because of their concern around climate. So we read and hear a lot about what's happening in Congress, but we don't necessarily pay as much attention to states like Maryland or Massachusetts, Illinois, Michigan, Nevada. All Republican governors, all passed clean energy legislation that made a very significant difference. I run a legislator academy for Democrats and Republicans from around the country, and we get Republican legislators in there, and it's not always the climate issue that resonates with them. It can be the economic issue. And the good news is there's a lot about the economic issue that has turned very positive in the last 5 to 7 years, and we make that case. And so we are seeing a build out. We're seeing the shutdown of the coal-fired industry in America. We're seeing our emissions reduction come down. We're turning now to the transportation industry and trying to look at the transition inside of the transportation industry for the same thing. And there are places where we see it happen in a bipartisan way, and we see it happen in an equitable way, where marginalized communities, tribes, Native American tribes, indigenous people are being brought along in this new economy. And I see it sort of, all over. There are a lot of patches where it's not happening as big, but, it is happening, and it's something we can take heart in.
All right. Thank you so much, Governor Ritter.
Thank you.
Thank you remotely to Secretary Kerry.
While hostile and even brutal division is not new, there are models for how polarized groups can constructively find a way forward. One example is the National Unity and Reconciliation Commission in Rwanda, which was created to promote reunification of the country after its civil war. Although it is not perfect, the Commission proves that it is possible to overcome differences through dialogue, communication, and a willingness to compromise. Recent experiments, such as Track 2 diplomacy and technological advancements, offer a new path to overcoming differences. The impacts are undeniable. From a ripple effect that encourages others to do the same, to promoting the creation of regional stability, it is clear that as hostility transforms into harmony, it impacts not only those directly involved, but the world around them.
As each century unfolds, the occurrence of war looms larger. Today, we are witnessing a shift from large-scale wars towards increasing internal conflicts. In the face of this challenge, I present to you the Common Ground Initiative, a strategy that humanizes conflicting groups by stitching the fabric of trust using the thread of shared interest. Consider the North Ireland conflict of the late 20th century, where nationalist Catholics battled against Unionist Protestants. Cross-cultural and shared community projects like integrated schools that brought together Catholic and Protestant children greatly helped in breaking down the barriers of suspicion and fear, and over time, the Good Friday Agreement was birthed. We need to reinforce common grounds among conflict groups to minimize differences and evolve interaction. By creating cross-cultural and self-dialoguing spaces that foster empathy, active listening, inclusivity, and trust, we will resolve differences and entirely curb conflicts. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm always moved to be here, to gaze at these stones and think about all the people over the millennia who have found inspiration in them, and to think about the beautiful and fragile democratic idea that was birthed here, the idea that people should have a say in who governs them, the idea that those governors should be accountable to the people. The idea that if they don't live up to their promises, you can throw the bums out. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, as the mayor said in his eloquent speech, channeling his inner Abe Lincoln. You know, we were hearing yesterday about the rise of civilizational states, quote unquote, civilizational states, referring apparently to countries like China, Russia, that look more to their culture and their history than dry, abstract democratic ideas like liberty, democracy, the rule of law, human rights, a free press, and so on. And afterward, my dear colleague Serge Schmemann came up to me and said, heck, you know, as civilizational states go, Greece is not so bad. If this is not a civilizational state, and please look around you, a civilization, actually, rather than that ugly formulation. I don't know where it comes from, and I still don't really know what it means. And like John Kerry, I'm inclined to bet on civilizations like this one. Well, obviously for democracies to work, people have to be able to get along. And our theme tonight is, why don't people get along? Why don't they get along better? And I'm joined by Amos Gitai, who is an Israeli artist, author, and movie director, by Balázs Orbán, who is a member of parliament and the political director of his namesake, but no relation, Viktor Orbán, the Prime Minister of Hungary, and by Cynthia Ritchie-Terrell, the founder and executive director of Represent Women. Amos, as an Israeli, I would like to begin with you. For 75 years now, two peoples inhabiting the same small sliver of land have been unable to get along with each other. In fact, they have repeatedly gone to war with each other. And the stalemate, the unhappy confrontation continues with occasional and entirely predictable eruptions of violence. Why, in your view, has it been impossible to get Israelis and Palestinians to understand each other and make peace? You got close with Yitzhak Rabin, and then he was assassinated, not by an Arab, but by a fanatical fundamentalist Jew, Israeli. So why is it impossible? Easy question.
Thank you. I think it should be possible. I want to salute Dana Dajani, who is here. She's a Palestinian, and her family was a subject to a big project on the Dajani house in Jerusalem. So I think it is possible. You know, Roger, once I interviewed the mayor of Nablus, Bassam Shaka, who was a subject of attack by extreme right Jewish settlers. He lost his legs. And I asked him the similar question. I asked him, are you optimistic or pessimistic? And I loved his answer. He said to me, it's too luxurious to be pessimistic. We cannot afford it. So I think we have to keep striving, we have to keep working on it, we have to keep doing joint projects. I don't know about coexistence, but I think we have to find a modus vivendi, because it's not a symmetrical situation. Israel is occupying parts of Palestine, so we have to recognize it. I talked to your colleague Farah last session, it was a pleasure. Also, another person who is sitting here from Hungary serves as a model of what we should not do. We should not do.
What do you mean by that?
We should not go into a racist direction. We should not block immigrants who are in necessity to find shelter. We should not marginalize LGBT. We should keep open democratic societies. So for us, you know, that some of my colleagues are marching in the streets of Tel Aviv, I have to say that this is the most moving event of hundreds of thousands in peaceful demonstrations for 6 months, every weekend. We use this country of a person who is sitting here as a model of what we should not do. Because, you know, killing the juridical system or reducing it, putting posters with the image of Soros, a Jew, he is going to change Hungary, fetishizing old fascists as a kind of national heroes. This is something we should not do.
I think I have to give. Yeah, I think I have to give Mr. Balázs Orbán.
I'm not over it, you know.
Okay, but I think I'm going to just, in the interest of debate, a quick response from you, Balázs Orbán, on what has just been said. As you know, Viktor Orbán has said the best migrant is the migrant that does not come. So what do you say to what has just been said?
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real privilege to be here. I know I had some kind of expectation. I was prepared not to be the most popular person on the stage, but this is how life goes on. And if we take democracy and real life conversation seriously, it requires some kind of tolerance, and it requires some kind of mutual understanding. And according to my understanding, that's why we are here, because we all believe in the idea of democracy and fair conversation. So thank you very much for hosting me. And I'm very happy to see that I'm not the only Hungary expert on the stage, but there are other Hungary experts on the stage, and I'm very happy to see that my wonderful 10 million small country requires so much attention. Hungary is a 1,100 years old country with a very unique language, with a very unique culture. We are in the middle of Europe, but we are culturally an island. We are very proud people. Many outside forces wanted to colonize us for long times. They were coming from east, from west, from north, from south. So my country's history is about the constant struggle for self-governance, for democracy, for defending our identity. And I think
So you want to keep your Hungarian blood pure?
No, it's not a race-based issue. It's a culture-based issue. It's about the language. It's about art. It's about, I think the word is better if
But can't culture be enriched by the arrival? Look at the United States, can it not be? Or other countries more open to immigration? Can't immigration be an enriching phenomenon?
Sure, but it's like entire United States is based on Canada and many other countries based on an idea of open borders and immigrations. And these are wonderful examples. They became very successful countries. But my country's history is different. That's why I wanted to reflect on history and the importance of history, which is decoded in the cells of our people. It's just a 10 million country. Probably even here in Greece, it sounds a bit more familiar. I think it's reasonable to say that the Greek people, they want to pass their own culture, their own language, their own way of living and thinking to the next generations.
Europe's history in scapegoating others, let's take the Jews, is not a very happy one. If you say the fault lies with others, the fault lies with the people who are trying to get into our country and somehow thereby destroy its essence, isn't that a very dangerous nationalist path to go down, given the history of the 20th century?
Look, you at the New York Times, or you in Israel, you don't have to. You have
a great friend in Israel, which is our own prime minister.
This is what I wanted to refer to. You don't have debates with Hungary. You don't have to convince me. You don't have to convince me. You have your own Republicans there. You have the Israelis there. And this conversation is about that we have political forces all over the world, in the United States, half of United States, in Israel, all over the Western civilization, and which are very proud of their identity. It's not a racial-based issue. It's about preserving our cultural heritage and how policy should be, government policy should be followed, how borders should be protected, how law and order should be kept on the streets. And this is why it is wonderful that we are here, because one could say that and this is my last word. Sorry for being so long. One could say that the message which comes through these walls is that everybody should be liberal, But this is not the case. The message which is spread by these walls is that everybody should believe in democracy, which is about that the decision of the majority of the people counts, even if you disagree with that. This is what we promote in Hungary, and this is what we believe. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to allow Amos to. I want very much to bring Cynthia in before these two men arguing across the one female presence on the stage.
It was inevitable.
Dominate everything. I mean, maybe the real problem with getting along is there are too many men running things. But Cynthia, I think you're going to get a good reception. But this has to be very brief, Amos. Okay,
I will speak about the woman, because he spoke about history of Hungary. So it's a personal story. The mother of the woman that I married to for 40 years was taken when she was 17 in Hungary, in Sziget, by Hungarian fascists, delivered to Auschwitz, then she did the Marche de la Mort. The fact of negating this piece of history, he spoke very nicely about 1,100 years. And this is a reality we have been living through. So the desire right now to erase a big part of this piece is not really in the great heritage of the Hungarian, including the atrocities they did to other populations, if you want a Hungarian story, authentic Hungarian story.
Thank you. Cynthia, thank you for being so patient. You've fought long and hard for greater female representation in the United States and beyond. Is one of the fundamental problems in terms of people getting along just that there are too many men running things, and if there were more women running things, the world would be a more harmonious place?
Absolutely, yes.
Could you tell us why?
Well, thank you. It's fabulous to be here. Great to be in this hallowed hall where I suspect many discussions have been had about important topics. And I was thinking about how to interpret the question at hand, which is how can we all get along? And I guess I translated that into something that I could understand how to talk about, which is how can we best equip our elected representatives that serve in the governments that we've established are the decision-making bodies that we respect and follow for the most part. How can we make sure they best reflect the people whom they represent? And I think there's a tendency, it's important and it's easy and seductive and sometimes distracting to think about the individuals who polarize us. But I think a deeper question, or one that I am most focused on in my work, are what are the incentives that are built into the system that creates the conditions that disable politicians from being able to work together on our behalf or to work on policies that the majority of the voters support. And so to my mind, a quick story about the history of the United States, a short one, is that 30 years ago, 25% of members of Congress, over 100 members of Congress, members of the House, represented congressional districts that were won by the presidential candidate of the other party. That's a pretty big number, over 100%. Now, in this year's election, there'll be fewer than 10 representatives who represent a district won by the presidential candidate of another party. And that problem is because of our political system, our winner-take-all voting system with its roots in single winner districts. So I am excited about talking about how to solve that problem and create the incentives for lawmakers to figure out how to govern effectively together and remove the jeopardy, which I think exists now, from crossing partisan lines. And I think that's how we learn to get along.
And what about women specifically and the role of, I mean, there's never been a female president of the United States.
That is true.
State the obvious. Why not?
We elected one. We just have this quirky electoral college, which disabled her.
No. I mean, we have the system we have for the moment.
We do indeed,
and Donald Trump was fairly elected in 2016. Of course, when he wins by a very narrow margin, the system is working perfectly. When he loses by a very narrow margin, it's been stolen, and you need to have an insurrection in the Congress. So that's how his mind works. But just talk to us in a moment about, I mean, that would be a world-changing event. Do you think it will happen?
Absolutely, yes. Which, not in 2024.
Right.
But soon. Soon.
Right. Well, yeah, 24 is the sort of geriatric election?
Yes,
yeah.
indeed.
Well, is one allowed to say that or not?
Yes,
I don't know.
yes.
Yeah.
Which I think is a problem just for anybody following the presidential election, that we don't have a more robust field on either side, particularly the Democratic side, because that leaves us pretty vulnerable, I think, us maybe putting on a partisan hat, to 2028, when we really need to have great viable candidates, including younger, perhaps governors like Gretchen Whitmer and others who are quite qualified. But I will say, just until the conversation returns to another topic, that the data on what women do accomplish when they come together is pretty significant. There's great data from McKinsey on the correlation between the percentage of women on boards and profit margins in the corporate sector. We've seen women leading on climate. We've seen women leading on peace and security. So many of the times in the history of the civilized world, women have come together to really solve problems. And
do you think men and women view situations, the world, fundamentally differently?
Why, yes, I think they do. Yes, in fact,
What's the difference?
I think there are a number of differences, but I'll tell you a quick story. I was teaching a class last week, and a student brought up a good little vignette that men and women were each asked if they could land a plane successfully, if given the opportunity. And I think it was something like 90% of men raised their hand and said, of course I could land a plane. And about 15% of women said they could land a plane without crashing, presumably. I think some might interpret that to say, oh, women lack a certain kind of a confidence. But the flip side of that, of course, is to say I think women often bring a more realistic perspective and less ego and perhaps more humility to a decision-making process.
Yeah. Balas, you made an important point about the lessons of these stones in this place, and that elections are about everyone having the vote, and they get to choose their leader, and then the leader should execute the policies that a majority of the people want. And I think you're suggesting that is what has happened in Hungary. Hungary, however, is widely viewed these days as an illiberal democracy, in the sense that Prime Minister Orban has installed his cronies in leading businesses, largely controls the media, has emasculated the courts, and that you have a form of democracy that, in essence, is much reduced. It's not quite at the point of Vladimir Putin's democracy in Russia, where there is, in fact, an election next year. And I was in Moscow quite recently, and I asked Mr. Peskov, who has been Putin's right-hand man for the media for a very long time, what would happen in the election in Russia next year. And he said, it's not democracy, it's bureaucracy. It is expensive bureaucracy. Vladimir Putin will get more than 90% of the vote. Well, I put that in my piece, of course, about Russia, and he subsequently tried to row it back a bit. But that is what he said. I mean, is that more or less, is the re-election, the constant re-election of Viktor Orban now more or less built into the structure of power in your country?
Thank you very much for the question. Just quick reflection to the previous topic. We do have a woman president for the first time in the history of the country, and we are very proud of her. And I think, as I'm following her as a politician, her name is Katalin Novak, and as I'm following her as a politician, it's absolutely amazing what women are capable for. I mean, she is extremely active, representing.
Why is it amazing? Why is it amazing?
Because they are representing the country. They are extremely hardworking. She is extremely hardworking. In the meantime, she is looking after her family.
Just wondering why that should be a surprise.
Doing these two things together, I think it's quite something. So I would recommend every country to have more women in leadership. The other part of the story is about the future of democracy and the future of liberal democracy. There is an idea or a concept which is actually coming from the United States, and it is talking about the fusionism. So working closely together of the anti-communist conservatives and liberals before the collapse of the Soviet Union, working against the anti-communist, anti-freedom, for working against the communist forces, uniting the anti-communist and pro-freedom people. And this was the fusion of ideas. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, this fusion between the conservatives in Western societies and liberals, it stopped. So it's not anymore the case. And the conservatives are complaining that liberals, they did overtake all the institutions in media, in culture, even in politics, even in economy. And there is not a fair competition between the anti-communist, pro-freedom forces inside the Western civilization now. And this is why conservative forces, you may disagree with them, but I just want to explain you the situation. This is why conservative forces are promoting a kind of a change, which is as it was described by my Prime Minister, an antithesis what is going on, where we are calling liberal democracy, but liberal, it does not mean freedom, it means liberal views, progressive views should be promoted and should be represented on every single institutional level. And this is not about pluralism. This is about hegemony. And conservative forces,
But you haven't answered you're not answering my question, which was, has Hungary become a liberal society?
No, but right now I'm answering to your question.
Oh, okay.
And the answer is, what we're doing in Hungary is we're trying to create an equilibrium, trying to create a real pluralism instead of hegemony, where you have the liberal institutions, where you have the liberal media, where you have the liberal political parties, where there is open debate, but also there are conservative institutions, conservative media platforms, and the range between them, it's not 90 to 10, but around 50-50. And I think this is something which is working. I'm not saying that Hungary could be a role model. It's a small country with a unique history, with a unique story. Every country has its own story. But what we see inside the Western civilization, if we keep going to continue in that way, that the discussions in a public life is dominated by liberal progressive forces, pushed by the media, not backed by the majority of the people, then we are going into a deep trouble, and it should be avoided. This is my point. Thank you.
Are you broadly in agreement with the view in Moscow that the West is completely decadent and that it's been taken over by drag queens and by LGBTQ people, and nation, family, the church are trampled upon, and all you have is the advance of these liberal hordes, traditional marriage is virtually dead. I mean, this is the caricature. I mean, is Hungary pretty much in agreement with that, or not?
I mean, it's really the case that if you say that you are pro-family, then you are immediately pro-Putin. Why is that?
No, I didn't.
Why we are killing the possibilities of discussions? I'm pro-family.
I didn't say that, and I personally, I'm pro-family.
But your question Your question was...
it was
no. It was a very...
Your Prime Minister said the main danger lies in Brussels.
No, it was a very good question. And because it shows us very clearly that how hard it is to discuss these important civilizational things inside the West, even inside the West as well. Because if somebody is saying something positive about families, about something positive about the importance of traditional families, somebody is saying that most probably gender ideology, as it is pushed for minors, it's not going to solve any our problems. Hungarian people voted against gender ideology for minors more than they voted in favor of European Union. Are they all fascist? Are they all pro-Putinist people? No, this is not the case. If we connect these things, if we connect everything with everything, and we try to find one narrative which fits for everything, that this is the good, this is the bad. If you are with us, then you are good.
Well,
right
here on this stage, we have three narratives, right? Right here. That is why we hold this forum, so that we can debate.
This is why I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming, because it's very important to hear different views, to debate them in a civil manner, and I think the sign of any society that is working is the capacity for civilized disagreement. I mean, otherwise, where do we go? There is no way
I
forward.
don't want to avoid your question. Russia is our neighbor, and we get some energy supplies from Russia. Russia is a fact for us. If we want to survive, for example, in the front of energy, now, today, in Hungary, you have to have a pragmatic relationship with Russia. It's a must. It's not about emotion. It's about the basic needs of the people. And me, as an elected representative,
we could go off on a big discussion.
Me,
of
as
Russia,
the elected representative of the Hungarian government, last sentence, my duty is to serve the interests of my people. This is how democracy works. This is why we have pragmatic relationship with every neighboring country.
Amos,
Thank you.
Reading Farah Nayeri's very nice portrait of you, I was struck by the kicker, the end of the piece, with this train ticket that you saw of your mother's that was an old train ticket from Haifa to Beirut. Of course, when you're in Lebanon now, nobody will even pronounce the word Israel, and if you do, you can get into trouble. And you ask, what is this ticket? And your mother tells you, well, it was once possible. Do you think it will ever be possible again? And do you think this elusive peace could ever be made? I was very struck in that piece by how you said, the Abraham Accords are all very well, Israel developing relations with other Arab states. But the core, the heart, the essence of the problem is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I'm in complete agreement with you. And I've expended more ink on this conflict than I care to think about. But do you think that there could be a peace, and even that you might be able to travel from Haifa to Beirut one day?
I mean, we have to keep this vision, because otherwise, like I said, what is it's nihilism, destruction, continuous war. So I don't know if we will get there, but we have to keep this struggle. The current powers in Israel is a strategy of creating chaos. Creating chaos, a bit Machiavellian. He kind of swallowed probably the book of Machiavelli. So he thinks that if he manipulates one group against another, he will win. I think it's a dangerous perspective, religious against secular, Sephardic, Ashkenazi, Jews against Arabs, etc.
And the emasculation of the Supreme Court, which is the only body that can hold the government, and particularly Prime Minister Netanyahu, to account.
Especially in a country of immigrants, because Israel is a composite society. It's Jews who came from Europe because of the disaster of the cruel disaster of the Second World War. Jews who came from North Africa, displaced after Arab nationalism, and Israelis who displaced Palestinians. So it's, in a way, it's a composite society of displaced people. In that sense, it's by definition a modern society. So I think that this displacement, this common thing, and the necessity. That's why I spoke about the fact that for me, the Israeli tactics of always trying to avoid, except the episode of Rabin dealing with the main issue, because this country is ours, the Israelis, but it's also the Palestinians. So it's a different conflict than Israel, Egypt, Israel, Syria. They have tanks, they have bombs, they have jets. The Palestinians don't. So I think that rather than confronting the core issue, which is both ethical, but it's also human, which is trying to find a viable modus vivendi with the Palestinians and inroads, and also I think it's the interest of the Palestinians to create their own society, respect of women, respect of minorities, no corruption. So I think it's their project. So they will not be, the Israeli colonizer will not be replaced, like in many third world, by local despots, which we know this phenomena. So it's a project that we should do commonly. And, you know, as you know, I was supposed to be an architect. I make films and theater, and in this microcosmos, we can simulate a proposition and conserve a memory. And when we conserve a memory, that friendship, the last play that I mentioned, which was in Paris, which will go to London elsewhere, it's Israeli actors, Palestinian actors, Iranian musician. So everybody who is fighting on the Middle East is on stage, working creatively. So we can show through art, which will not change the reality. Art will not change the reality, but will keep a memory that this relation is possible, like the train tickets of my mother.
I'd like to finish, we only have a couple of minutes, I'd just like to finish with Cynthia, give you the last word. I'm very struck, you know, in life, if you get 70% of what you want, you're doing pretty well, I think. I mean, that's not bad. But in our democracies today, and in this absolutist kind of societies that we live in, where people are all shouting at each other on social media, unless you get everything you want and unless you denounce the other side, it's quite rare to see people change their minds or to come together. I mean, do you think anything can be done about that, or have we just come up with a kind of technological machine that generates polarization, and there's nothing much we can do about it? Compromise is unfashionable. The notion that the perfect can be the enemy of the good does not persuade many people. I mean, the good is almost always imperfect, and if the war in Ukraine is ever going to end, I think it has to end in some kind of ugly compromise. Just as in Bosnia, the war I covered when I was much younger, and the end was pretty ugly, but not another shot was fired in anger after 100,000 people had been killed before my eyes. So, you know, I kind of believe in ugly compromises. And good compromises are better. But what's happened to compromise, and can women help with that?
Yes, I think women definitely can help and must help and are helping and have helped. I think that we have an imperative to do as much as we can to leave the world a better place, and I don't think it's sufficient for any of us to be pessimists about this, as I think was said earlier. But I do think we need to create systems of government where there's an incentive for people to work together. And right now, there are models of democracy happening all around the world where that's happening more than in the United States. And I think one thing the United States and places like the New York Times and other places can do well on, is to really cover the models that are creating the incentives for legislators to find common ground. And there's a handful of countries that have gender balance in government now. Mexico and New Zealand are among the democracies. Australia is doing pretty well. We have an Australian MP in the House who was elected with ranked choice voting. Yay, it's the system of the future. There are a lot of other countries, but the United States ranks 71st. I think there maybe are 24% women in Israel and only 14% women in the Hungarian parliament. And so until we change systems to level the playing field and give voters more power to elect candidates of choice through different voting systems, I really think that that's one of the things that United States is an outlier on in terms of our winner-take-all or first-past-the-post system. But these proportional systems, which really almost every new democracy, for the most part, has embraced, I think, again, create the conditions where coming together to solve policies on behalf of the constituents that representatives serve, that's where the most fertile ground is.
Well, at this point, I have to end the discussion. We've gone over some difficult issues and some clear disagreements, but I hope the tone has been respectful throughout. That certainly is our intention. Thank you very much.
Thank you for a great panel. Thank you. So, at the Democracy and Culture Foundation, one of our strong beliefs is that it is through culture and art, like poetry, that we can get people and all of us to get along with each other more. So we come to a poetic interlude. It was 2013 that we were in this very space, and we had a president that delivered the inaugural keynote address. It was President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. And as he was sharing with us his views on democracy, he pointed to this statue and referred to it as a goddess of democracy. Today we have a modern-day goddess, Dana Dajani, that will give us her interpretation if I was president. Dana.
Taxpayers, shareholders, and Instagrammers, lend me your fears. The evil that men do lives after them, yet you seem disposed to brutish beasts, men who have lost their reason. Now, bear with me. If I was president, I would drone out the demands of the corporatocracies and focus on communities. My foreign policy would be to explode education opportunities onto third world countries and refugees. Healthcare and housing, why, they'd be free. Imagine what we could aspire to create if we didn't have to hustle to fulfill our basic needs. If I was president, my role as conflict mediator would include therapy and hugs. My constitution would be universal love. My border policy would be open door. I'd eliminate banks and in turn free the poor from the shackles of debt. I'd do some spring cleaning in the media outlets and TV stations so that only honest journalism and valuable information was broadcast to my nation. If I was president, I'd make my citizens pay taxes in the form of planting trees. Your tax return would be heirloom seeds. There'd be a national farming day off every week, and Monsanto could kiss my plush pink cheeks if I was president. If I was president, classrooms would have no walls. Teachers would be paid more than guys who play ball, and education would be a community call. Because I know that it takes a village to raise a child, and so it would take the whole world to lift up one country. And when we got to where I think we could be, why, we would elevate all the rest so that they can see what we see from such great heights as true liberty. Now, I'm not talking about spreading democracy through war games, no. I'm talking about authentic development and fair trade, a free-flowing exchange of ideas, resources, and yes, humans. As your presidential candidate, I should tell you, I think restrictions on immigration are a bit stupid. Anyone who plants roots here will surely bloom, and, well, what a beautiful garden that would make for all of you. If I was president, I would hand out passports and postcards, encourage my citizens to travel to the far reaches of the earth, asking all who ventured out to share what they learned so that my nation could never become a xenophobic herd of ignorant, violent, belligerent, closed-minded, right-wing leeches who spew hate speech. If I was president, I think it's clear what my stance on welfare would be, an absolute necessity to ensure that my citizens felt compelled to find work in an industry which speaks to their soul and heart. If I was president, creating your perfect job would be an art that we all would enjoy, because I know that what you do with love will benefit every girl and boy in our nation, and probably beyond. If I was president, if I was president, I would lead a campaign to collect every weapon on Earth, march them straight up into a volcano, dump them in, and brace for planetary rebirth, because with no hateful metal between us, we'd have to dance out our differences. There'd be no more battling, just the rattling of bones to booming music till all collapse, sweaty, settled, unassuming, and laughing at all those moves they saw those dancing troops doing. Our bodies, not so different after all, free to be loved, decorated, celebrated, not ravaged by war. If I was president, I'd tell Big Pharma to stuff it with their pills, make sure BP, Shell, and the like never had another oil spill, and ensure that Mother Earth stops footing the bill for our compulsive consumption. Now, with these upcoming elections on the horizon, I just wanted to make clear you understand the person I am, the principles I stand for, and the world I envision. But ultimately, my fellow citizens, it is your decision. Whether or not you elect a president who advocates division could lead you on a neo-inquisition. Oh, beware the hype of television. And stay true to your democratic values. Because if I was president, that is what I'd do. I'm Dana Dejani. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Socrates said, a philosopher king. I'd say maybe Dana, poet for president. Thank you, Dana. That was beautiful. And you've given us a lot of inspiration to move into our next segment with a lot of pride, the inaugural Kofi Annan Next Gen Democracy Prize. It's a dream come true. I wish Kofi Annan was here to see it. He's seeing it from above. And he's represented by Corinne Mamalvanian, the president of, or executive director, president, now your president, of the Kofi Annan Foundation. Corinne.
Dear fellow democracy advocates, dear friends, after 2 rather gloomy days, we gather here in this beautiful setting in celebration of a remarkable individual who has dedicated her life to a cause that transcends borders. In a world often overshadowed by cynicism and apathy, at a time when we are told that people are turning their back on democracy, we've heard a lot of this, or do not care, individuals like Namatai Kwakweze remind us that young people do care very much, and that we should dare to hope. She shows, her work is clear testimony that the news of the impending death of democracy is widely exaggerated. The road that Namatai has traveled has not been easy. She has faced adversity, even persecution, and countless obstacles along the way. Yet she has refused to be cowed and to be silenced by fear or state intimidation. The path of the activist is not for the faint of heart. It demands courage, a fierce commitment to justice, an unshakable belief that in the transformative power of democracy. It requires the strength to stand up against injustice, the wisdom to seek common ground, and this we probably are not doing enough, and the vision to see a world where every voice is heard. Namatai embodies all these ideas, not only in her words, but in her actions. She has mobilized youth across Zimbabwe. She has sparked conversations about the injustices in her country, and she has challenged an oppressive system. The world today, with its complexity and all the complexities and the challenges we've discussed over the past few days, yearns for such leaders who possess the courage to confront injustice when they see it. The prize is awarded to Namatai because she exemplifies this leadership. Democracy thrives when individuals, no matter how young or old, and Namatai already told us, she's very young, she's 24, rise up to protect it. And it is not a sprint, but a marathon, an apt metaphor for our location. It requires resilience, courage, and patience, a lot of patience. So I want to thank Achilles and the Democracy and Culture Foundation team for partnering with us on this, in this process. We truly value our partnership, Achilles. Let me thank also the Greek artist, Stefanos and Yannis Souvatsoglu, who have made the beautiful statuette that you will see, who were so inspired by Namatai's story that they made a statuette specifically for her. And in addition to this special work of art, the prize comes with a grant, and we hope that it will help Namatai scale up her work, and with mentorship from one of our partner organizations. Let me thank also the selection committee, and that included in particular the Club de Madrid and the Atlas movement. It was a very, very difficult choice, let me assure you. Among the 10 finalists, they were incredible young people who are doing fantastic work in defense of democracy all across the world. Some of them are here today. I would like to recognize Andrew Regalado. Andrew, you should stand up. I think Andrew, who's American and is the National Grassroots Director of Country First Action, I think he's already impressed you very, very much over the past 2 days with his passion for decency and moderation in politics. Alejandro and Dua were supposed to be here, but I think they're not, unfortunately. But really the 10, they are. Fantastic. So stand up. Fantastic. Okay. I'm so glad. Alejandro Daly, who's Venezuelan, who's the founder and co-director of the Xenophobia Barometer, and Dua Mohammed, who's a Syrian human rights activist and defender. So really, I ask you to give a resounding round of applause to all these 10 finalists, amazing young people. But the biggest round of applause will come for Namatai Kwekweza, Executive Director of Wheatley Trust, for her remarkable accomplishments and dedication to the defense of democracy. Kofi Annan once said, and I quote, "We must cherish, reform, and defend democracy, or else it may be lost for future generations," end of quote. Namatai, may your courage inspire other young people to stand up for what is right and to hold the generation of entitled leaders, as you called them this morning, to account for what they're doing to future generations. May your example really inspire us all to keep defending democracy for the future generations, as Mr. Annan would have wanted us to. I now welcome Namatai Kwekweza onto the stage to receive her award. Congratulations, Namatai. Where are you?
Thank you very much, and a very good evening to you all, ladies and gentlemen, friends, comrades. Tonight, I wanted to just start by saying that I had a very amazing experience the first night I came here, after a very dramatic experience on my journey, lost luggage, crazy visa experience. I met the man who designed this particular award, and I had a very interesting conversation with him. And he said to me that this particular award, when I was designing it and sculpting it, for me, I had within myself a reflection of all the amazing people that are doing similar work as you are. I had the envisionment of the values that you embody, that are embodied by thousands, if not millions of people across the world, who might never get the privilege to be where you are. And when he said that to me, it spoke to me that I promised him it would definitely be a part of my speech. So I will start by saying that tonight I am dedicating this award to the activists who might never be recognized but are doing equally impactful work. I dedicate this award to the activists who are in prisons, to the activists who have been persecuted in ways that we cannot possibly imagine, and particularly to the activists who have paid the ultimate price, the ultimate cost of struggle for democracy. Some activists have lost their lives, lost families, lost marriages, lost children, and we must always be cognizant of the true cost of the struggle of democracy. And depending on which part of the world you belong to and you live in, the cost might actually be higher. Depending on what's at stake and the particular tyrant that is being threatened, the cost might be excruciatingly painful. We must consistently, in platforms like this, have cognizance and memory of all of these individuals, of past, present. Having said that, I will start by saying that stories are powerful. And tonight, I'm going to share with you a story, because I believe that all human beings love stories, and when I look at all of you, I can tell you are no exception. So the story is the story of a young woman. Her name is Nehanda Chirwe Nyakasikana. She, in 1897, was leading an amazing protest and revolution against colonial encroachment in my country. And the colonizers, the BSAC, the British South African Company, responded violently by hanging her, decapitating her, and taking her remains to England as part of what they called a trophy of conquest. Now, to date, those remains have not been returned to her homeland. But every time I move in the streets of Harare, they have put up a statue, a monument of her to celebrate her memory. And particularly, she is remembered in our history for having said these words, "My bones will rise again." And those words became the rallying core of struggle, and particularly the struggle for our liberation and our independence. Her radical insistence to state that what she had started in her timeline would eventually be carried forward by future generations who would deliver on the promise of freedom, on the promise of dignity, but fundamentally on the promise of equality. Buyanehanda was murdered, persecuted, hanged, decapitated, humiliated. But her belief and her radical insistence in her humanity is what has inspired me in my activism journey. And tonight I dedicate this speech to her, but to so many more other people, and particularly to women who, at the expression of courage, when they show up for leadership, are treated in ways like this. As I reflect on all of these stories of the past, stories that uniquely make me who I am, I reflect on my own personal present journey as an activist. Having decided to stand against the amendments of the Constitution, which were subsequently making the executive more powerful and undermining the judiciary, undermining the parliament, I found myself in a very precarious position where I was arrested. And I found myself locked up in a very filthy prison, in a very filthy cell. And I remember very clearly how cold it was and how terrified I was. But what had started as a simple effort to try and deliver a petition to our Minister of Justice ended up in a very, very unusual response for me, in which I was detained, my passport was confiscated, and I had to consistently be attending court for over 2 years. Now, for me today, all the charges were eventually dropped after the state failed to prove a case. But I do know thousands of individuals in my country and across the world who are being detained and who are being persecuted in what we call lawfare, where the law is weaponized against its own citizens. In my country, we have a man, Job Sekala, Jacob Ngarivume. All of these individuals have been detained, and particularly Job Sekala, for more than a year, for standing up for what he believes in, for his political participation and speaking truth to power. And all of these stories, we find them in so many different places across the world. Now, what has been so difficult in my activism journey is the reflection on consciousness, and particularly reflecting on consciousness in the context of what is the responsibility of our individual governments to be, but also what is our collective responsibility as a world. True to say, our governments have been corrupt. They have abused human rights at a gross scale. We do know that corruption that has happened, particularly in the Ministry of Health, has denied people their fundamental right to health. Corruption that has happened in the Ministry of Education has denied thousands of children their right to quality education. We do know that clearly there has been systems of patronage and tyranny. But all of these things find a strong amalgamation in a very hostile global system that must not be ignored. A global system that has a financial architecture, political architecture, security architecture that militates against other civilizations, making it so difficult for certain people and certain races and certain nations to thrive and to make good and also deliver on the promise of democracy in their own countries. Having talked about this in this context, I will not go ahead and give clear examples. But what I will say is that reflecting on all of this is important because it helps us to not point fingers and blame, but to also try and locate ourselves in the context of what is our responsibility to be, what has been our contribution to the crisis, and therefore how do we redeem our power to make sure that we contribute to being part of the solution. So I will end this particular conversation with these 11 honest serving words. These 11 honest serving words have a very great significance to me, and I will explain them briefly to indicate to you what they meant to me and how they have propped me up in my activism journey, even in times when it was difficult and hard. The first word is amandla, Zulu word which means power. And I'm particularly inspired by how during the apartheid, they would shout, amandla awetu, which means power to the people. That is a radical insistence that democracy exists where the people are. And it gives us the power to be able to speak freely and to be able to radically insist on our humanity, radically insist on the rights that we deserve, which are inalienable, but also radically insist on our power to hold those who have power and that we have elected to account. The next word is reimagination. We have clearly seen that the current global order is no longer serving us as we want it to be, as it ought to do. And therefore, we must begin to use our imagination to rethink, recreate a different kind of order, a different kind of global financial order, a different kind of global political order, a different kind of global security order, a different kind of global tech order, and a different kind of global order that encompasses all of these elements, that is hinged on inclusion and diversity. Inclusion of people who might not look like us, who might not sound like us, but to value the essence of their humanity and to embrace them as being part of those who will make decisions and those who help construct a future that we all want to live in. The third word is Ubuntu. And I like it when Nelson Mandela talked about it this way: I am because you are. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we are now living in a world of interdependence, where the problems that are happening in some other part of the world cannot be said to be their problem. They become our problem. If we run our companies in a manner that we exploit certain countries, we create a migration crisis because the conditions in those parts of the world are not livable, and they have to move into other people's countries. If we have industrialization that is hinged on burning fossil fuels, we create a climate crisis that makes conditions for other people in other parts of the world unlivable, and they begin to move into our countries. A clear indication of our interconnectedness, that the problems that are happening in some other corner of the world inadvertently become our problems. The fourth word is dignity. And I will not talk much about this because I have already mentioned the conversation around human dignity. Dignity cannot be ascertained in poverty. One of the most powerful things that J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, has ever said was that poverty is humiliating and it is romanticized only by fools. And I believe that those in countries, but also in the international system, that build systems and structures that manipulate the global order and manipulate the global financial architecture in a way that produces and manufactures poverty. All of those people that create human misery through their decisions and their systems, all of those individuals are denying us our dignity. And we must consistently challenge that, we must consistently speak against that, and we must consistently proffer solutions that give us an alternative. The next word is complexity. The world has become increasingly complex, and the activist of present must always remember that it is not a them against us, it's not black and white. We must recognize the complexity in the stories of those we call foes. We must recognize the complexity in the stories of the other, the stories of people who do not look like us, and recognize that there is no one single story, and that there is a danger in telling a single story, and that is what Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie would say. The next word is memory. We must not forget the past. Historical injustices must be talked about openly. Where we must compensate, we must compensate. Where we must pay reparations, we must pay reparations. We cannot undermine the pain of others that they have experienced in the past, and we must be willing to have critical conversations that build trust and rebuild faith in the multilateral system, sincerely, truthfully, and honestly. The next word is courage. And I use this word particularly because it is essential for us to take action. And for me, it is strongly hinged to hope, because I believe that it takes courage for us to be able to hope. Maya Angelou, the great poet, once said, "Courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, it is impossible to practice any other virtue with consistency." So as we embark on this journey, we must remember that those who deny us our rights can be extremely violent. Those who deny us our rights and build infrastructure that is exclusionary can be very hostile. But amidst all of these dangers, we must have the willingness and courage to still stand up for what we believe in, to stand up to the aggressors, to stand up to the agitators, to stand up to those who have a strong commitment to building systems that manufacture human misery. The eighth word is inclusion. Inclusion of youth, inclusion of women. I believe that whatever solutions we will proffer in the future must be youth-friendly and fundamentally feminist. The next word is hope. And in particular, Friedrich Schmitz once said that those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. I believe that hope is the music of our hearts. Hope in itself is what enables us to act. And those who are seen dancing in this instance are those who are taking action. And I believe that those who take action have within them a profound hope in the belief that their actions could inadvertently lead to something that is better than the present state. Hope is powerful. And I'm particularly grateful that this year's theme was, Do We Dare to Hope? Because Barack Obama once wrote a book with the title, The Audacity of Hope, in which he personifies hope as having an audacity, a nerve. And that is what exactly it takes to hope. The audacity and the nerve. The next word is sacrifice. And sacrifice is particularly so important because the struggle has a cost. And the alchemists believe that for you to gain something in the universe, you must in turn exchange something of equal value. Everything that we enjoy, the beauties of democracy that we have enjoyed in the last decades, have been the eminent results of the past sacrifice of past generations. We, in this timeline, in our generation, must also sacrifice. We must be willing to pay the price in full to have a world that is more inclusive and more democratic. The final word is future. And I will say this, that the future, ladies and gentlemen, is coming. It is coming, and that is a certainty. As sure as the sun rises, the future is coming. But what this future can be and will be should be the eminent result of our pragmatic action, our deliberate intentions. The future of democracy cannot be a thing of circumstance or chance. It can only be our radical impression of that future through our imagination, but also our actions. P. Drucker once said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And all I will say is that each and every one of us sitting in this room has the power to create that future. All of the activists organizing across the world are creating that future through their actions, and we cannot retire our faith to tyrants. We cannot retire our fate to individuals who are selfish. We cannot retire our fate to those who stand together organizing violence against the rest of the world. Is it possible for us to win? Of course it is. Muhammad Ali says that impossible is simply a big word that is thrown around by small men who find it easy to live in the space they have been given than to explore the power they have to change it. I believe you and I have the power to bring about the change that we require in the world. You and I have the power to radically insist on the beauty and the power of democracy. You and I are going to do it. You and I are going to win. Thank you.
Well, our dear Namatai, may you inspire us in this way for many, many, many years to come in our quest to help democracy evolve. With you, we can do it. Thank you. Well, with inspiration like this, and with the Greek gods having been kind on us and no thunderstorm, I think we should all take a stroll through the ancient agora and Plaka. Thank you all.